Okay, so we've been able to catch your presentation. It was very interesting for us, and we want to ask you some questions. That's okay. Sorry for the formalities. Okay, so your games, My Child Lebensborn, if I pronounced it correctly, and Shadow Puppeteer, how the decision to make those games came to you, and how the process started?
Well, with Shadow Puppeteer, it was more a brainstorm on the group, looking into which type of topics we would find interesting. With My Child Lebensborn, it was actually the co-founder of Techno Pilot, a different studio that was co-collaborating on a documentary called Wars Don't End. And so she actually contacted us about the topic of the Lebensborn children. And because she knew that we were working with these type of topics and were interested, and she kind of pitched it to us or explained to us the story of the Lebensborn, and we decided at that point that we would try to make a game to tell the story.
Okay. How to choose, in your opinion, how to choose a topic for a video game that would transcend borders and would be relevant even to distant countries, distant nationalities like Japan, Chinese people?
Well, I think when we look at, for instance, now that we're making new games, just always trying to think about which universal themes are out there, and which things maybe people don't talk about enough and know about enough. And as long as you have some kind of human suffering, which there's sadly a lot of, these type of topics, even though, for instance, with My Child Lebensborn, that's a very Norwegian specific thing, but it has so many universal themes in them. The story of bullying, the story of not feeling like you belong, of being labeled as something that you're not. And I think as long as you choose a topic, it could be about something very specific, but trying to look at how people as a whole and how society treats these things, I think is important to be able to share it with more people.
Okay. What influences are the most important on that kind of games, like you made? What influences are the most crucial?
Well, I mean, I think making sure to be influenced by people's stories, human stories, is very important. In My Child Lebensborn, it was the story of the Lebensborn children and what they experienced, and also we talked to someone called Eglė, who also has experience with child abuse, and she wants to, she writes books about that. And so making sure to get inspired by real stories and real people, I think, is very important. Trying to not just see a story and put it in, but to also actually try to understand it properly. So it's a little bit strange, but for instance, when we were working on My Child Lebensborn, there were several times when I had to kind of tell my team that, okay, I'm just going to have to go away and cry a little bit right now. And then, but using that to get inspired to work with gameplay in the same way. And then you realize that, okay, I read a story, this made me cry, I get inspired by that, I turn it into gameplay, and then I realize that when people get to that same part in the game, they react in the same way. And I think just as a game designer, it's very important to learn about life and people and try to understand people that are different from you. But I think that's also important when it comes to making games. Just trying to understand, like, how are people going to react to this, and why do people react the way they do. So I also read a lot about psychology, about how children express themselves, for instance. So taking a lot of inspiration from real life is very important, actually.
And it's also, as I understand, if you don't feel it, you don't cry or want to cry, so how can you expect that people will do that? So that's
Exactly.
also quite a point, I think. Okay. How can you compare reactions to your game or games from people from Norway and also from people from other countries and players? Because it is a dark theme, quite dark theme, so how can you compare both reactions? What are the differences?
In one way, a lot of the reactions are the same. We have a lot of, even like 50-year-old men who review the game and just say that, yeah, I cried so many times playing this game. And you have the same reaction from a 14-year-old child playing the same game. But we see that, for instance, in Norway, I think people react a lot more to the general setting and the fact that this is part of our history. And just a general topic of, bullying and people being unfair. Well, for instance, in Japan, they reacted very strongly, not necessarily to the historical elements, but just the human story of the child. Because bullying is very prevalent in Japan, so a lot of people felt like they could connect to the child because they've also experienced bullying. In China, it was more the idea of being able to be a parent and take care of a child. Well, in South Korea, for instance, it reminded them a lot more about their own personal stories of the comfort women. So I think there's a lot of different things that people experience. We also had someone from the US talk to us about how she really connected with the game because she's also adopted. And so even though that hadn't, like, that was just part of the story, but it was still an important part, and she could connect with that pain even though she hasn't experienced being bullied herself. She felt like that feeling of not really belonging. So very many people kind of react differently to the game, but they all have this shared love and care for the child. And a lot of people also get quite angry at the game society, the society inside of the game. And I have gotten some people kind of complaining because they're not allowed to walk up to the school and burn it down or something. But what we see is that in China, and that's been so strange for us because that culture is so different from ours. But they really love the game, and they will write like pages and pages of reviews for this game, and they'll make a lot of artwork, and they'll play the game several times, and they really get into it, even though it's a completely different culture. So that was a real eye-opener for us, I think, because we really did not think that Asia would respond to the game the way they have.
But you in some way you nailed some aspects that are very important for them, unknowingly maybe at that time, and they just responded to that.
Yeah, I definitely think the fact that the child is so lovable, and that I think the style in itself, also the kind of Tamagotchi style, worked really well with them. And something I didn't know, but that a few Chinese players have told me, is that people in China actually really love to cry. So yeah, that's kind of like
connected.
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Another question is children born of war. It's a very difficult topic. So I can imagine that was there some kind of backslash for this game, some kind of negative reactions or based on that? But why?
There were actually quite we thought that there would be, and we were prepared for that, but there's been very little backlash, actually. I think that might also be connected to how we communicate the game. We make sure that people understand what this game is, and we let people know right away that we have been actually working with the victims here. We have had a couple of people who, for some reason, have misunderstood the game and thought that it felt like it's almost like a Nazi propaganda game or something. But as soon as we've talked to them, they've understood, okay, that's not what this is about. Because, again, the child is just half German. They have nothing to do with all of that political elements. So, very little responses to that are negative. Yeah.
And is there in Norway some topics or some themes that you feel that people wouldn't understand or wouldn't want you to touch, or is there some? For example, in Lithuania, there are some topics that developers or movie makers just wouldn't touch because it would be very like I don't know, inappropriate or in the context wouldn't feel right. So are there some like this in Norway? Or
there might be some topics, but to be honest, it really feels like we really celebrate art and openness.
Okay.
Of course, there are certain topics that, if there's something that might be perceived as potentially racist or potentially seen as misogynist, then the Norwegian people will be very, very upset. But in general, we're very open to people sharing their minds, so we're very lucky that way. Mm-hmm. And I think this game does have a lot of taboo topics, though. Like, for instance, and it was really hard to work with the topic of child molestation. Yeah. I mean, it's the worst thing you could imagine, right? We're not even able to really talk about it in our team, and our some of our programmers just don't want to play the game themselves, right? Because they just can't. But I think the fact that we do it in such a delicate way, nothing is really spelled out properly, so you understand. There's a lot of subtext there, and you understand what's happened, but it's not kind of shoved in your face, and I think that really helps a lot, because this type of game, you can very easily get a game that ends up being disrespectful. Yeah. And so you have to be very careful with that. And I think the fact that we made sure that there might be a lot of things that players don't understand, and I think that was actually very important for the game.
Okay. Mobile gaming. It's more suitable. Is more mobile gaming, in your opinion, more suitable to tell stories like this, like yours, and like for a more emotional approach than big games and games for consoles?
Well, I mean, there's some great games for consoles that also do this, right? You have This War of Mine, yeah, and Senua's Sacrifice. So they do this really well. I think it just really comes down to what type of gameplay you have. For us, we felt that mobile was the best platform because for this specific game, because you sit with a child, it becomes very close, and you have the touch functionality is actually quite important in the game. So you could, for instance, if the child feels down, you can start petting the child, and that actually makes the child happier. So I think for this game specifically, it was very important to have a mobile, because you can sit close, you can relax, you can kind of feel more connected. But for instance, with Shadow Puppeteer, that was a co-op game about loneliness, and there the Wii U was actually a lot better platform for the game. So it really just depends what you want the player to do, right? Or in Shadow Puppeteer, a lot of the gameplay is what happens outside of the game. People sitting in the couch together and talking to each other, and they have to communicate, and they start becoming more connected with each other, like the characters in the game. And so it's very important to think about your platform, depending on what you want to tell and how you want to tell it. It's going to be interesting now because we're porting the game to PC and console. So we'll see. I'm, the type of designer that feels like, no, it's not going to work. But so it's going to be interesting to see, because I mean, if it doesn't work that well, and people don't connect in the same way, then okay, maybe we don't earn that much money, and the game doesn't spread as much as on mobile. But then I'm right. But hopefully I'm wrong, and then we can have more success there as well.
But there's also what I'm thinking about is like the gaming community. It's a little bit separate from the consoles community.
Oh yeah.
There's like different kind of gamers and players, for example, and then the mobile gaming community, it's more like rainbows and kitties and puzzle games, and you get exposed to a game like this. I don't think, well, for myself, I didn't see a lot of games like this on mobile. There may be some, but you have to dig for them.
Yes.
On the spotlight, it's always a different kind. There was an old man's journey. It was kind of, but not that kind of view developed. So, and when you suddenly see a game like this, and you just get, you get it noticed more easily. You notice maybe that also affected.
Yeah, I think it really helps that it surprised people. I think it's a negative in the sense that a lot of the people who go to play mobile games want puppies and kittens and rainbows.
They're used to them, like.
Yeah. So I think it's both things, right? I think there is a bigger market to reach out to on console and PC for this type of game, while on the mobile it's more difficult to find them. But of course, when you do, it feels like they're more verbal about it. So there's some ups and downs, I think. Okay. But I think there is definitely a growing market for it, and people are saying that we want more games like this. Please give us more games. So I think hopefully more people will make these type of mobile games, and like also Florence, and then because I also want more mobile games like this. So.
Okay. So we're nearing the conclusion. But maybe that's a kind of a philosophical question, but I just really want to hear your opinion about that. Is mobile games an opportunity to play it parents with children together and explore and explain also difficult topics?
Yeah, I definitely think that mobile is a good platform to be able to play with children and parents and children together. Because most children already play a lot of games on mobile, and I think that it's a platform that they're more used to, and it's just easier to pick up and play on a mobile than on console and stuff like that. So I definitely think that there's a lot of potential in that space to make games that parents and children can play together, and I don't think maybe enough people have really realized yet. But hopefully that they will. I think probably more tablets rather than mobiles, but that space definitely has a lot of potential.
Okay. And the last question: what's next for you? What other plans do you have? I understand that porting to the consoles and PCs, but speaking about projects, like.
Yeah, I mean, we still have some more stuff with Child Lebensborn, like Technopilot is making an educational version for schools, and we're porting the game, of course, and we're starting a charitable organization for children born of war. But then Sarepta, we're also working on our new title called Project Thalassa. So now we're actually going back over to PC and console, and it will be a first-person psychological drama where you're a deep-sea diver in 1905. And we'll be tackling topics such as loss, trauma, and PTSD. So the production value will be a lot higher, and we're working with that now, and it's very interesting to be working in 3D again. But we want to do a lot of the same things. We want you to think about things, reflect, feel, make your own choices, be a part of creating what's happening. So it will be really exciting to see where that goes.
Okay, cannot wait for it. And thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this talk. Okay, thank you.